So this is part 2 of the video for question 4 for paper 2. So it's comparing the different perspectives of the writers of the National Railway disasters, and we have to compare their different ideas and the methods, the language techniques that they use to convey those attitudes. So let's have a look at these two texts. The first thing to say is, and I briefly mentioned this before, is that you've already done a question on the language of one of these texts. So you've got those you've got that bit of information that you've already written for question 3 that you shouldn't discard. You can still use what you said about those language techniques in that one text to help you do this answer. The other thing is you've done question 2 as well. And in question 2, you established, the differences in the writer's viewpoints and their perspectives. So now you're moving on your answer to look at the way that they use language to convey those different ideas and perspectives. Going to bring in that little bit of analysis. So let's have a look at source A. And a bit like question 2, I would start looking at source A and draw out all the things I want to say about the way the writers convey their perspectives in the first source. And then I would go to source B and look if there's any similarities and differences, and that's how I'd write up my answer as well. I'd start with a paragraph about source A, and then I'd write about source B but refer back to the things I've said in source A and talk about how it's similar or different. And as I said before, you're mostly going to be looking for differences. Okay, so this is the source from Charles Dickens, and we already established that it's an eyewitness account that he's writing to a friend. And so it's a first person account, so we've got lots of I coming in. So there's the first sort of aspect of language you can talk about. Just to have a quick look at source B, it's more of a third person account, as we've said before. Charles Dickens in this extract is talking about his reactions to the train crash, and he was actually there. So he's using that first person account to some effect in that one. And then in this one, we've got the newspaper writer who's interviewing parents. And so he's sort of reporting on their reactions and their thoughts and feelings about the train crash. And so we've got more of a third person kind of account going on here. So he uses words like there and they, and talks about the parents of the daughter who tragically died in that train crash. Okay, so that's a little bit of a difference to pick out straight away. But looking more closely at source A, we already established in question 2 that Dickens is presenting his view of the train crash as something quite horrible. So he presents the horror of the train crash. So now if we do a little bit of analysis to work out how he's actually doing that. So the first thing I've highlighted here is, a couple of verbs, some powerful sort of dynamic verbs. And he talks about the train beating and dragging, or the carriages beating and dragging. So those sort of violent, powerful verbs. Let's put in a comment here. Okay, so we've got powerful verbs to convey the violence and the horror of the train crash. Okay, yeah, so beating and dragging, both those words sort of infer or suggest violence to me, and that it was quite a catastrophic event. In fact, those powerful verbs convey that to me. And then he says, and he talks about the dying and the dead. So we've got a nice alliterative phrase there. So again, we can bring in a little bit more sort of language analysis here. The dying and the dead. So both those words starting with that D. And often, alliterative phrase. Alliteration is often used for emphasis. So, what is he actually emphasising here? He's emphasising emphasis. He's emphasising the extent, I suppose. The
extent of the death surrounding him. And it presents a sort of shocking image of the effects of the train crash. Okay, and the idea of, talking about the dying and the dead, it's that repetition of death in those two words in the concept kind of emphasises as well the shock and the image of horror that surrounds him. And he actually, says it's most horrible as well. Right, so we've got a bit of analysis going on there, which helps to convey his perspectives on the train crash. And then the other thing that we also have, and what I would do when you're looking through the text, is you kind of look for words and phrases or techniques that are kind of repeated or perhaps have the same effect. So, for example, he uses this word suddenly a couple of times. Suddenly. So, of course, these are adverbs, and these convey to me that everything was happening quickly, and that he feels sort of out of control. He feels out of control, which, highlights the chaos of the train crash. But more than that, there's other adverbs that he uses as well. So we get these collection of adverbs that are being used. So madly as well there, wildly, to talk about the reactions of the other people in the compartments. So madly and wildly, and they too convey a similar kind of feeling, the sense of people being kind of almost crazed, people behaving in a crazed, chaotic fashion. So that sort of hints at the chaos as well as the result of the train crash. And also this word plunge out of the window. So here we've got the verb plunge, and that suggests to me that people were really out of control. Out of control. Sort of behaving unthinkingly. As a result of the chaos of the train crash. Okay. Yeah. So we've got these verbs: madly, plunge, and there's even more, like this one, flung, as well. Suggests this idea of, I think he must have been flung clean out of this carriage, and that presents that imagery of sort of chaos, of people being out of control, like the train crash has overtaken them in some way, and they're just being flung around in the air. And in addition to that, we've got words like people staggering, covered in blood, people stumbling around. So all those verbs and adverbs convey that sense of chaos and drama surrounding the train crash. There's this sense of confusion. So, there's some language features already, but I've missed one up here as well that I think is quite good. I'm not entirely sure what Dickens is saying here. I don't know whether it's a typo. Suddenly we were off the rail and beating the ground as the car of a half-emptied balloon. So, of course, what we've got here is a simile. Beating the ground as the car of a half-emptied balloon. And the similes are usually used to create imagery. So, even though this is a non-fiction text, he's still employing techniques that are probably more literary. So, beating the ground, so we were off the rail, beating the ground as the car of a half-emptied balloon might. So I kind of get the impression that he's kind of drawing a similarity between the carriage that he's in sort of being like a half-emptied balloon So if you can imagine, all the air has come out of the balloon and it's just kind of sort of limp and sort of being thrown around, if you like. The carriage is limp, like a half-empty balloon. You know, and this simile also conveys the chaos and sort of a sense of powerlessness, really. That it's just being flung around like an empty balloon. Okay, and then the final thing I want to say is about sentence forms. So here he's talking about a man that he's come across, and this man then says, "I am gone," and died afterwards. So Dickens uses this sort of short clause here, short, powerful clause, to convey sort of a deep sense of pathos and sadness at the death of one of the passengers. So, you know, that short clause there kind of stands out to me, and it seems to have a bit of emphasis on it, partially because of what it's talking about, but also because it is that short clause at the end of that longer sentence to say that, you know, this man has died. And he does the same thing. This one is a shorter sentence here. The next time I passed her, she was dead. So it's another short, to the point sentence to evoke feelings of pathos from the reader. Okay, and then the final thing is he talks about the imagery of seeing the people twisted up among iron and wood and mud and water, and this sense of these people being twisted up. So twisted up. It's a disturbing image of the effects of the train crash on the passengers. So twisted up, almost, you know, twisted implies to me that the people are almost unidentifiable amongst the wood, the mud and the water. Do forgive my typos. I'm trying to type quite quickly. Okay. And the mud. Okay, so that just gives across that kind of disturbing image of the aftermath of the train crash. Okay, so if we look at source B then, so we've already said that it's more of a kind of, this newspaper reporter is reporting on somebody who wasn't at the train crash, so the families of the victims. And so it does have a slightly different feel to it, so the ideas that the writer conveys are slightly different because it's focused on the individuals who weren't there. It's the families who weren't at the train crash. I'm actually just going to stop this video here because I'm going to run out of time because I only have 15-minute slots to fill. So I'll stop this one, and so if you go to part 3, we'll have a look through source B.